So that brings me to Module B. And Module B seems to be the easiest because you've just got one text. Could be a suite of poetry, such as Eliot, could be Hamlet, or it could be that you're studying speeches or a novel. But there is one catch here. They can ask you any question. It is the one where you are expected to know the text intimately. They could ask you about the closure. They could ask you about a key scene. They could actually say you must discuss this poem or this speech. Or it could be a scene in a film. So you really do need to know this one well. So what does your rubric say? It actually says you've got to demonstrate an informed understanding. What on earth does an informed understanding mean? Well, firstly, hopefully for you, you've read, reread and reread your text. And you've made lots of really great notes in columns, and you can really looked at how the themes are conveyed, characterization of the text or the persona, the key ideas, etc. But informed means that you've read beyond that. You've actually looked at some critics. Maybe you've discussed it with your class and your teacher. So informed means you really get it. You understand the ideas in the text. Secondly, notice the evaluate, the verb again, weigh, judge. This is your personal opinion. The concept is in fact interpretation. What is your interpretation of the text? And that is through the language, the content and the construction. So language is fairly easy, you know what that is. The content, pretty easy. But the constructions, the form and the structure and everything that comes together to make that text what it is. Please don't neglect that last one. And lastly, can you write an essay in response to the question and convey ideas? Remember I said this dot point of the rubric applies for all essays. So let's recap some of those points then. It's informed personal understanding. Read as widely as you can. JSTOR, for example, on the internet, Google Docs and put PDF after it. You'll find some really great stuff. Just do some work. Go to your local library, go to university. Read as widely as you can. I don't mean to appropriate what someone else says, but to inform your own understanding even further. You're going to explore and evaluate a specific text, such as, for example, Eliot or Hamlet, and its reception in a range of contexts. So how was it received when it was first written? And how do you receive it now? Explore the ideas expressed in the text. Thinking about, as I said earlier, construction, content, language. And ideas is the biggest driver in Module B, like what are the main ideas you take from the text and why? And whatever question we ask, there's always going to come back to ideas. And then you have to examine particular features of the text that contribute to textual integrity. And I'll go a little bit further into that in a moment because that's really important. And then lastly, most contentious one of all, test others' perspectives against your own. This doesn't mean you have to do a whole lot of isms like feminism and Marxism and post-colonialism and whatever else you like. Do you know the best way? Just read some really great critics. And they might actually disagree or support what you're saying, and you might want to mention 2 or 3 in your essay, and that would suffice. So what are the concepts? Firstly, interpretation. It's the explanation of meaning within the context of one's understanding. Textual integrity. This means does the whole text work coherently? Is it a cohesive, integrated piece? Why do you think the Board of Studies chose these texts? The texts are canonical. These are valued texts. So these are texts that have integrity. We know that from the start. And lastly, as I said earlier, construction. Form, structure and language all working together. If I were to do this as a diagram, it's actually reader reception theory. And what does that mean? The text sits in the center like this. Over to the side, you've got the composer. What influences the composer? Well, his or her context. Perspectives, which are personal, cultural, historical and social. Then they will choose the language, characterization and construction of their text to bring meaning to it. That text hopefully has unity and coherence, which is integrity, and that then produces ideas. But on the other side, you've also got the responder. And what meaning do they take from the text? And of course, influencing them could be an informed understanding from other critics. So the approach, ideas first, artistry. Artistry is a really interesting term. It's like how all the language works beautifully, or everything comes into play to make a piece that is memorable for you and resonates. The characterization, if it's a novel or a play or a film, not character, character's personality. Characterization is the crafting of a character. And then you've got in poetry, persona, and then you've got voice, for example, in a speech. Key incidents in the text. You need to know the setting inside out, the form and structure, the language, and as I said, a personal response. So let's use Hamlet as an example. It still tends to be incredibly popular. Unusual form in terms of Hamlet. Yes, we know it's the tragedy, but this is the birth of a modern tragedy. In fact, Shakespeare's being incredibly clever. He subverts tragedy. At the time, Queen Elizabeth and then moving into King James were actually very much opposed to the Old Testament and the use of revenge because they saw it as going against Christian values but also their own power. You've also got revenge called by Francis Bacon of the time a sort of wild justice. It's a world of divine providence, but this time it's man interfering with it. You've also got Hamlet, and I love his line, time is out of joint. He's in the wrong man in the wrong place. He's a Renaissance man. He's not a military man. He's a university-trained man. And he's not into revenge and murder and mayhem. And he suddenly has to search for who he is. One of the best critics I've ever read on him, very different to what you might have encountered, is a man called Colin McGinn. And he talks about Hamlet as being this representation of human identity, a fractured dialogue between one's conscience, reason, and emotion. The Elizabethans frequently held that a melancholic state was this disposition towards excessive thought. And of course, the gorgeous line at the end of the play when he dies, now cracks a noble heart, good night, sweet prince. And sweet because, again, he's not ready for this time. He represents the philosophical humanist who values and favours reason and intellect over aggression. And of course, the very famous line from Pico, what piece of work is a man? So the essay for Module B, for all of your texts, it's a close and critical analysis. You've got to ask yourself what is being said, the content and the ideas. Why is it being said? Context and purpose. How is it being said? Form, structure, language, things like poetic devices, word choice, motifs, cinematography, the list goes on depending on the test. A personal engagement with the key ideas informed by others' perspectives. Please don't just simply quote a critic. Actually use the critic to either agree or argue with what they're saying. How and why the text has integrity and it's valued. All those things working together, form, language, structure. And you need a holistic understanding of the text. Remember what I started with earlier? I said, what's the key line that resonates for you the most? What is it in the text that stands out for you? Hamlet, for me, it's to be or not to be, simply because he's asking about who am I? I've got one here, again, from one of my students for T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot's poetry is, again, a modernist period. And when he's actually writing, he's quite critical of what's happening in his time, and he feels that we're losing a sense of who we are and our purpose in our life with his industrialised age. So let's have a look at what one of my students has done for his opening introduction. Eliot's provocative suite of poetry perpetuates the timeless complexity of the human condition in finding existential authenticity and meaning in a fragmented modernist epoch of the horrid or sordid or disgusting. One, he's used a quote from Eliot himself. Two, he's talked about a suite, not just two poems. Normally a question will ask for two poems. Always overview the suite first. His metafictive poetry reflects his ontological journey as an escape from emotion and the occupation with his own self and inner being. The love song of J. Alfred Prufrock explores the negative consequences of stasis and inaction instigated by self-abrogation that creates an unsettling tension within society, unable to answer the overwhelming question which is from the poem Prufrock. This negativity and the challenging search for meaning is explored further in Preludes, inculcating the need for faith rather than spiritual vacillation to avoid being hollow. This arduous journey towards self-actualization is captured in Journey of the Magi, Eliot's antithesis of taking action and finding faith to only further the complexity of finding meaning in life with the last twist of the knife, lamenting the constant need for existential questioning of do I dare and how should I presume, in the dynamism of asking questions and of learning not to reply. Quite a sophisticated opening where he's actually used a lot of the lines of the poetry.